The day my father announced my sister's promotion to the entire hospital board, I was standing 6 feet away, holding a folder of research that had just saved a child's life. He didn't look at me once. My name is Vanessa Cole. I'm 32 years old, and I am a research oncologist at St. Croix Augustine Medical Center in Baltimore. And on that particular Thursday morning in March, I was, to my father, simply furniture. The boardroom on the 14th floor smelled like leather chairs and old money. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the inner harbor, the water flat and gray under an overcast sky. My father stood at the head of the table, broad-shouldered and silver-haired, the kind of man who fills a room without trying. Dr. Gerald Cole, Chief of Surgery, 28 years at St. Augustine. A name on a building wing. He was mid-speech when I walked in, and he didn't pause, didn't nod, didn't blink. I took my seat at the far end of the table, the folder in my lap. My sister Ashley was beside him. 36, chief surgical resident, his carbon copy in a white coat. She had his jaw, his certainty, his way of looking at a room like it already owed her something. She caught my eye and smiled, just slightly, the kind of smile that means nothing. I knew before I sat down that my name would not be spoken. I had submitted the research proposal 14 months earlier. A pediatric glioma treatment protocol, a combination approach using targeted immunotherapy and localized radiation sequencing that I had developed over 3 years of trial data. It wasn't theory, it was a result. A 7-year-old named Marcus. Not my family's Marcus, just a little boy from Dundalk with an inoperable tumor, was sitting in a first-grade classroom right now because of it. His mother had sent me a card. I kept it in my desk drawer and read it on hard days. My proposal had gone up the chain. Department head, then the research committee, then the board. 14 months of silence. That morning, my father's voice carried easily across the table. Ashley's surgical program, he said, sliding a bound document to each board member, represents the future of this institution. The kind of bold, decisive leadership that St. Augustine was built on. Murmurs of approval. A trustee in a navy suit nodded. Another wrote something down. I looked at my folder. Vanessa. My father said my name once at the end, with the tone of someone mentioning a footnote. Has also submitted some research. We'll have the committee review it in the next cycle. The next cycle. That was April. 6 months away. I kept my face neutral. I had practiced that, the way you practice anything you do 1,000 times. After the meeting, I stood in the hallway waiting for the elevator. My father passed me without slowing down. Ashley was beside him, already talking about budgets. Neither of them stopped. The elevator doors opened. I stepped in alone. I pressed lobby and stared at my reflection in the brushed steel panel. A woman in a gray blazer holding a green folder. Composure intact. Eyes dry. Only her hands, gripping that folder a little too tightly, gave anything away. I had been here before, many times, but the first time I really understood how this worked, I was 23 years old, sitting at a dinner table in our house in Roland Park on Thanksgiving. The dining room had the kind of warmth that photographs well, but doesn't always feel real. My mother had put out the good china, the ivory set with the gold trim she only used twice a year. Candles on the table. A turkey that had been roasting since 10 in the morning. The smell of it, sage and butter, still lives somewhere in the back of my memory. As the smell of P8 and butter still lives somewhere in the back of my memory, as the smell of certain kinds of pain. I had gotten into the MD-PhD program at Johns Hopkins that afternoon, a full fellowship. The letter had arrived by email at 2047 p.m. while I was making a cranberry relish at the kitchen counter, and I had stood there reading it 3 times with my heart hammering against my ribs. I waited all through dinner to find the right moment. My father was in the middle of a story about a complex bypass he had performed that week. Ashley was asking questions, the right questions, leaning forward with exactly the right expression. I watched them and waited. Across from me, my Aunt Ruth was refilling her wine. My cousin Jerome was on his phone under the table. My grandmother was eating quietly at the end, the way she always did. Finally, during a lull between the main course and dessert, I reached across and touched my father's arm. "Dad, I have something." He looked at me with that particular expression. Not unkind, exactly, but the way you look at an interruption. I told him about the fellowship. Full funding, 4 years, the combined degree. Hopkins. I said the words carefully, like I was placing something fragile on the table. He picked up his fork. He didn't put it down again. Hopkins, he said, and the word came out the way you'd say, fine, I suppose. Research. Yes, the MD-PhD track, oncology focus. He nodded slowly, the nod of a man who has already decided something. Your sister finished her surgical boards last month. Top of her cohort. He turned toward Ashley. Tell her about the Kellerman Fellowship. And just like that, the conversation moved. Ashley started talking. My father leaned back in his chair with the ease of a man who had just steered something correctly back on course. Nobody said congratulations. My aunt smiled at me from across the table, a small, private smile that was the closest thing to acknowledgement I received that night. My grandmother reached over and squeezed my hand once without looking up from her plate. After dinner, I sat on the edge of my childhood bed with my laptop open to the Hopkins acceptance email. The house was still loud downstairs, my father's laugh booming through the ceiling. I closed the laptop and looked at the bookshelf across from me. Third shelf from the top, between a battered copy of Gray's Anatomy and a memoir about Marie Curie. There was a journal my mother had given me the year she died. Pale blue cover, her handwriting on the inside flap. For Vanessa, who notices everything. The world needs that. Mom, she had died when I was 15. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed late, treated aggressively, and still. She lasted 14 months after diagnosis. I was the one who went with her to appointments when my father was in surgery, which was often. I was the one who sat in the waiting rooms reading to her from whatever book she'd asked me to bring. I was 11 the first time I understood what a pathology report was. I was 13 the first time I watched a doctor deliver bad news and thought, there has to be a better way to do this. My father had grieved her, I know that. He had grieved in the way of men who processed loss through motion, more surgeries, longer hours, awards accepted on her behalf. But he had never talked about her with me. Not once, not in 17 years. The journal was the only thing of hers I still kept on the shelf, instead of in a box. I looked at it for a long time that Thanksgiving night, and something settled in me. Not defeat. Something quieter than that. A decision. If this table would never have room for what I was building, then I would stop looking for room at this table. I would build somewhere else. The years that followed were not easy. Research never is. The first 2 years at Hopkins were a particular kind of hard, the 18-hour days, the protocols that failed, the funding applications that came back denied, the colleagues who looked at my work and said things like, interesting approach, in the tone that means I wouldn't bet on it. I had a stipend that covered rent on a studio apartment in Remington with a radiator that clanked all winter and a view of someone else's brick wall. I made friends there. Real ones. Not the kind you inherit from your family's social circle. My closest friend through those years was a woman named Dasha, a computational biologist from St. Paul, Minnesota, half Russian, entirely unimpressed by pedigree, and one of the sharpest people I have ever met. She worked on the floor above me in the research building. We started sharing a coffee press in a break room and ended up sharing everything else. She was the first person I ever told the whole story to, not the edited version, the real one. The one with Thanksgiving in it. She didn't say anything for a while after I finished. Then she said, the world is full of people who can't see a thing until someone with more authority than them points at it. You just have to get the right person to point. I thought about that for a long time afterward. The pediatric glioma work started as a side project, an observation I'd made during my residency, a pattern in how certain tumors responded, or failed to respond, to standard radiation. I started tracking it informally, then formally, then obsessively. By the time I joined St. Lena, Augustine's oncology department, I had 3 years of preliminary data and a hypothesis that a targeted immunotherapy primer administered in a specific sequenced window before radiation could significantly improve outcomes in pediatric cases. Not all of them, but enough. The trial was small, 9 patients, strict criteria, rigorous monitoring. 7 responded above expected benchmarks. 2 did not, and I wrote about those cases just as carefully, because the failures teach you as much as the results, sometimes more. One of the 7 was the boy from Dundalk. His mother's card said, "You gave us more time, and time is everything." I kept that card in my desk drawer on the right side, under my stapler, where I would see it when I opened the drawer in the morning. When I submitted the full proposal to the research committee, I believed in it. Not with arrogance. I've been wrong before. I knew how science worked. But with the specific, grounded confidence of someone who has spent 3 years with a question and knows the answer holds. 14 months later, my father summarized it as some research in a boardroom and moved on. I went back to my office. I closed the door. I sat in my chair for exactly 4 minutes doing nothing. Then I opened my laptop. The morning after the board meeting, something happened that changed everything. Though I didn't know it yet, I was presenting data at the department's weekly tumor board when a woman I didn't recognize slipped into the back of the room. She was in her late 50s, small-framed, with the kind of focused stillness that makes you notice a person. She stayed for the full 90 minutes and didn't look at her phone once, which in a room full of clinicians is remarkable. Afterward, she waited while the others filed out. Dr. Cole. She stepped forward. I'm Dr. Sylvia Marsh. I'm a visiting associate at the NIH's National Cancer Institute. I was told I should see your tumor board presentations. She paused. I wasn't told they were this good. I didn't know what to say for a moment, which doesn't happen to me often. She asked if I had time for coffee. We walked to the cafeteria on the second floor, the one with the decent espresso machine and the window that looks out onto the atrium. She asked me about the glioma protocol, not a surface-level question, a real one, the kind that shows someone has read the work. She asked about my patient selection criteria. She asked about the 2 cases that hadn't responded and what I thought had been different about them. We talked for 2.5 hours. She was working on a larger multi-center initiative, a national pediatric neuro-oncology consortium being assembled under the NCI. Phase 2 trials, significant funding, 12 participating institutions. They needed a protocol. Your sequencing approach, she said, setting her cup down, is the most coherent thing I've seen in this space in 4 years. And I've seen a lot. I heard her. I wanted to believe her. I had learned over the years to hold moments like this carefully, not to clutch them too hard in case they dissolved. Can I ask you something? I said, of course. My proposal has been in committee review at this institution for over a year. I'm not sure why I'm telling you this except that it seems relevant. She looked at me for a moment. Something shifted in her expression, not surprise, more like recognition. Dr. Cole, she said, I'd like to invite you to present your protocol at the consortium's national conference in Chicago next month. If the assembled directors respond the way I expect they will, committee timelines become somewhat less relevant. I flew to Chicago on a Tuesday in April. The conference was at a hotel near the Magnificent Mile, the kind of place with a marble lobby and conference rooms named after Illinois governors. 230 oncologists, researchers, department chairs, and NIH directors. I was on the agenda for 45 minutes in the main hall. I had practiced the presentation 47 times. I know that because I kept a tally mark on the legal pad on my nightstand. I stood at the podium and I gave the most honest 45 minutes of work I had ever done. I showed the data. I showed the failures alongside the successes. I talked about what I didn't know as clearly as I talked about what I did. I put a photograph of the patient outcomes, anonymized, compliant, on the final slide. Not for sentiment, but because the numbers are easier to dismiss than the fact of a child sitting in a classroom. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Dr. Sylvia Marsh stood up. She didn't applaud. She said, clearly to the room, "This is the protocol we've been waiting for." And the room moved. Questions came, sharp ones, good ones, the kind that mean people are taking something seriously. A department chair from UCSF asked about scalability. A pediatric neurologist from Boston Children's asked about contraindications in younger patients. The NIH's Deputy Director of Cancer Research asked if I had considered extending the framework to adult gliomas. I answered every question. Some of them I said I don't know yet, and explained what the next phase of research would need to look like. That, I have come to believe, is one of the most credible things a researcher can say. Afterward, in the hallway outside the main hall, a man named James Whitfield introduced himself. He was the Associate Director of Partnerships at the NCI. He handed me his card and said, "We'll be in touch about the consortium contract this week." I stood there holding his card. The hallway was full of people moving, conversations, the clink of coffee cups on trays. I found a quiet corner near a window that looked out onto Michigan Avenue, and I called Dasha. She picked up on the second ring. "How'd it go?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. Vanessa, how did it go? I said slowly. Someone finally pointed. I heard her exhale sharply. Then quietly, I told you. The NCI consortium contract arrived in my inbox 9 days later. 12 institutions. Phase 2 funding. My protocol, officially adopted as the foundational framework for the national trial. I printed it out, I don't know why. I just needed to hold it. I set it on my desk, next to the card from the boy's mother. 2 days after that, I received a call from St. Augustine's research director. The committee, he said, had completed its review of my proposal. The board had voted to approve it with full institutional support and a matching grant to supplement the federal funding. 14 months, and then 9 days, and it was done. I want to tell you that I felt triumphant, but what I actually felt, sitting at my desk that afternoon with the approval letter on one side and the NCI contract on the other, was very tired. The specific exhaustion of someone who has been holding something heavy for a very long time and has finally been allowed to set it down. I had one more thing to do. I had not spoken to my father beyond professional courtesies since the board meeting. That wasn't unusual. We had existed in the same institution for 3 years on a kind of parallel track. Same hallways, different orbits, but something had shifted, and I thought we both knew it. He came to find me, which surprised me. He knocked on my office door on a Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks after the Chicago conference. He was still in his white coat, a surgical cap pushed up on his forehead. He looked for the first time I could remember, like a man who was thinking about something he hadn't already decided. I heard about the NCI contract, he said. Word gets around. He stepped inside without waiting to be asked and stood near the bookshelf, looking at it. Not at me. Your mother would have understood what you were doing, he said. I'm not sure I always did. I looked at him. I waited. I should have said something in that board meeting. He didn't phrase it as an apology. It came out as a statement of fact, the way surgeons often speak, as though the admission itself is the instrument. I thought about what I wanted to say. I had imagined this conversation many times over many years, and in those versions, I usually said quite a lot. But sitting there, I found I didn't need most of it. I know, I said. He nodded. He looked at the journal on my shelf, the pale blue one. I watched him see it, his jaw tighten slightly. I want things to be different, he said. So do I. I meant it, but meaning it and knowing what it looks like in practice are different things. I think that's going to take time, real time, not a conversation. He nodded again slowly. He started to reach into his coat pocket. If you're about to offer me something, I said quietly, please don't. His hand stilled. I looked at him, my father, Dr. Gerald Cole, the name on the building, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not victory, just a clear-eyed sorrow for the distance between us, and a very steady certainty that I was the one who knew the way back. If there was a way back, and that I would take it at my own pace. I'll see you at the department meeting Monday, I said. We can start there. He left. The door closed behind him. I sat for a moment in the quiet of my office. Then I opened my desk drawer. I took out the card from the boy's mother in Dundalk. I read it again, the whole thing, even though I have it memorized. You gave us more time, and time is everything. I put it back. I put it gently next to the NCI contract. I picked up my phone and called Dasha. Buy you dinner? I asked. It's 4:15 on a Thursday. I know. A pause. I'll get my coat. What I know now, sitting here looking back at all of it, is that I spent a very long time measuring myself against a standard that was never designed with me in mind. A table with a fixed number of seats, and a seating chart someone else had drawn. The moment I stopped trying to get a seat at that table and started building my own was not a dramatic moment. It wasn't a single decision. It was a slow accumulation of mornings when I got up and worked anyway. Every data point I recorded in a trial, no one believed in yet. Every question I answered honestly, even when the honest answer was, I don't know. Every late night in the lab when I was the only one there and the work was the only company. I think about my mother sometimes when I teach. I have a small group of second-year residents I meet with weekly, a seminar on research methodology, but really it's about learning to think carefully in conditions of uncertainty, which is what medicine is, mostly. There's a young woman in a group named Petra, 26, from outside Cleveland, who asked the kind of questions that make the room go quiet. The kind of questions that sound simple and are actually everything. I recognize her, not because she reminds me of myself exactly, but because I recognize the quality of attention, the way she notices things other people move past. I told her once, after a session when she'd raised something genuinely new, something I had to sit with for a moment before I could respond. The questions you're asking are the right ones. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. She looked at me the way you look at something you've needed to hear for a while. I knew that look. I know it from the inside. Somewhere across Baltimore, in a first-grade classroom I will never see, a boy named Marcus is probably raising his hand right now to answer a question. His mother is probably at work, thinking about him the way parents do, in that quiet, continuous background hum of love and relief. She doesn't know that there is a researcher in an office on the 14th floor of a hospital on the Inner Harbor who also thinks about him, who kept his mother's card under a stapler and read it on the hard mornings. He doesn't know he gave me something too. We don't always know the direction things travel. We give something to the work, and the work gives something back. And sometimes the thing it gives back is just the knowledge that it matters, that it was worth the 14 months, and the silence, and the Thursday boardrooms, and the not looking and not being looked at. It was worth it. I know that now. I know it clearly, the way I know the results in my data. Not because someone told me, but because I measured it myself, over time in conditions I controlled, with methods I could stand behind. That is enough. That, for me, has always been enough. The only thing I ever needed was to know the work was real, and it is real. I know because a little boy is sitting in a classroom, and his mother sent me a card, and I read it every morning before I start. That is my evidence, and my evidence is good. I've thought a lot about what actually changed things. Not the NCI contract, not the conference in Chicago, not even the moment Dr. Marsh stood up in that room. What changed things was something quieter and older than all of that. It was the decision I made on a Thanksgiving night when I was 23, sitting alone on the edge of my childhood bed, holding a journal my mother had left me, listening to my father's laugh come up through the floor while my acceptance letter sat forgotten on the dinner table with a cranberry stain on the corner. I decided that night that I was going to stop measuring myself against a scale someone else had built. Not dramatically, not with any announcement. Just quietly, in the way that real decisions usually happen. In private, in the dark, when no one is watching. That decision didn't protect me from anything. The years that followed were hard. There were mornings in a lab in Remington when nothing was working and no one believed the protocol had legs and the funding kept coming back denied. There were hospital hallways where my father walked past me without slowing down, and conference rooms where my name was an afterthought. None of that stopped because I had made a private decision. It just stopped being able to stop me. I think about the cause and effect of it now with some clarity. My father treated my work as irrelevant, and so I learned to make it undeniable, not out of spite. Spite runs out, it's not a sustainable fuel, but out of something more durable. I believe the research was real. I had sat with a boy's pathology report and thought, there is something here, and I had been right. That knowledge was mine. No one in a boardroom could revoke it. What I know about intelligence, real intelligence, the kind that's worth anything, is that it is not the same as being the smartest person in the room. It's the willingness to sit with a question long enough that you stop needing it to confirm what you already think. It means being just as careful with your failures as your successes, because the failures are where the real information lives. I wrote about the 2 patients who didn't respond to my protocol with the same rigor I brought to the 7 who did. That honesty, I believe, is what Dr. Marsh recognized before she recognized anything else. And integrity. I used to think that was a word for speeches. Now I think it's just a habit of doing the same thing whether or not anyone is watching. I worked the same way at 9 in the morning with my department head in the room as I did at midnight alone under fluorescent lights. That consistency is not glamorous. It doesn't make a good story, but it compounds. Over time, it becomes the only thing that holds. Dasha told me once, the world is full of people who can't see something until someone with more authority points at it. She was right. Dr. Sylvia Marsh pointed. The room moved. My father went quiet. But what Dasha didn't say, what I understood later, is that you have to keep building the thing worth pointing at. You have to keep showing up to the work, even when no one is pointing at anything yet. That in-between time, The years of not yet is where character is actually formed, not in the moment of recognition, in all the mornings before it. My father stood in my office and said my mother would have understood what I was doing. That was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. I believe he meant it. I also know that one sentence, however true, doesn't close a distance built over decades. It's a beginning, maybe. I told him it would take real time. I meant that too. What I want. If you are sitting somewhere right now feeling like your work is invisible, like the people who should see you are looking just past you at something else, what I want you to know is that the recognition was never the point. The point was always the boy from Dundalk. The point was always the work being real. If you can hold on to that, if you can keep your hands on the thing that is actually true, regardless of who in the room acknowledges it, then you are already doing the only thing that has ever mattered. The table you build yourself will always be steadier than the one you were waiting to be invited to sit at. I know that now. I know it the way I know my own data. Not because someone told me, but because I measured it over time and the results held.